18. An imaginary country. What happened on Monday afternoon was not entirely Maya's fault. She had come home that day in a grisly mood because during her French class the teacher had called on her, as he almost never did, just 5 minutes after it had started to rain, so hard the water went streaking diagonally across the huge windows that looked out from the classroom into the bleakness of the courtyard. The rain had made her think dark thoughts about time passing and how the fateful 40th day was now already this Thursday, and that had reminded her of how she still had no clue where in Paris might count as a suitable magical place for summoning shadowy Fourquois and defeating them, and that had made her wonder all over again how an ordinary human, even if very motivated and trying hard to be brave, actually goes about defeating a death-cheating shadow. And all of those thoughts, together with the grim, slanting rain, had distracted her enough that even though she had studied very hard the night before and had memorized the poem in question, which was by someone called Arthur Rimbaud, and as far as she could tell compared all the vowels in the alphabet to various colors, and had been quite difficult to understand. Anyway, even though she had studied and memorized and prepared, when the teacher asked her to explain to the class lines 3 and 4, in which the letter A is likened to the black of velvet-suited flies buzzing around cruel stenches, which is, let's be honest, a peculiar turn of phrase, her mind and her French had failed her, and she had not been able to say anything that made the slightest bit of sense. So she would not be called on again for a month, probably, if ever. So much for hard work and fitting in. Then, when she came into the apartment after school, she found her mother sick in bed with a headache and nausea, and that made Maya herself feel sick inside with worry, and all those angry, anxious thoughts about how fragile and recently ill mothers should not be put through, or put themselves through, dangerous adventures like being pregnant, battered against the glassy, brittle sides of her brain, and were hard to keep hidden. She bottled her worries up and kissed her mother and promised to check on James, who, said her mother, had been playing so quietly all afternoon. And that was the third thing. James wasn't in his room. For a moment Maya panicked, remembering other awful times when she had looked for her baby brother and he hadn't been there. But that lasted only a moment, because then she caught the sound of James humming, which meant he was busy with something fun and complicated and entrancing, and that sound was coming from behind her own bedroom door. And when she flung open that door, she found her little brother on the floor of the room, an old box open beside him, the box's ancient papers and letters strewn all around him, and several of his little toy people having battles on top of some very old and intricate illustrated sheet, which James had apparently dug out of the family archive box and unfolded flat on the floor. "James," said Maya. Said is kind, she actually shouted. "What are you doing in here with my things?" James went from prone to sitting up in less time than you would think possible. He didn't look guilty, but he did look very surprised. "My little truck rolled in here by accident and got under your bed. Did you know there are boxes hiding under there? This box is mostly boring stuff, but I found this imaginary country in there, so my people needed to do some karate on it right away. It's a map." "James," said Maya. She could feel herself beginning to seethe, and that in itself was unsettling. All these years since James was a teeny baby, she had never felt as annoyed with him as she did now. He had always been so incredibly charming. He smiled at you with those soft brown eyes, and how could you be mad, really? But now she seethed, and maybe that was because she was especially stressed out and impatient, and maybe it was because James had fewer drops of charm running through his veins these days than he used to have. Hard to say. "You cannot come into my room and go through my stuff," said Maya. "That is 100% not okay. Get up, take your people, and go back to your own room. Now I have to clean up this whole mess." James gulped and looked around, as if he thought the nice sister he had known all these years must be hiding somewhere nearby. That just made Maya feel even grumpier, of course. She picked up his toys and stomped back across the hall to his room with them, and left them in a topsy-turvy pile on his bed, while James trailed along sadly. And then she went back to her room and shut the door firmly and sat down on her bed and put her face in her hands. That was a bad moment indeed. So, on top of her mother feeling sick, and the world as we know it maybe being about to end, she was having to look at the possibility in the eye that she, Maya Davidson, was not always a very nice person. In fact, she, Maya, seemed to be turning out to be the sort of person who snaps at her beloved baby brother for almost no reason. It was discouraging and a disappointment. After a short bout of misery, though, Maya's eyes started to wander around the room a bit, noticing the old letters everywhere and the general chaos, of course, but also, more and more, pulled in by that printed sheet of paper James had spread out across the floor as a world for his little people. It was indeed a map. She could see the roads and avenues wandering about across it. But what kind of town could that be? The artist had drawn in hundreds of little trees, cypresses for the most part, but also the wider, darker triangles of pine trees, and mixed into those trees were dozens and dozens of little houses, some with towers, some not. What was this place, and why did so many of the houses look like itty-bitty temples? Maya moved the book aside that was holding the top of the map flat against the floor, and she couldn't help it. She gasped out loud. Because under the book, it turned out, the map had been hiding a title, Le Père Lachaise. Of course, those little temple-like houses weren't houses at all, but tombs. Maya had never seen any map of any place quite like this one, but now her mind had come quite fully to life and was racing ahead at full speed. Père Lachaise Cemetery? What was that map doing in the Fourquoy family archives? It was very, very old, she could see that. In the bottom right corner, in very small type, was the printer's date, 1887. And all along the edges were long lists of names. The little hairs on the back of her neck were standing up now. They knew what was coming, just as a tree knows trouble's on its way, a split second before the bolt of lightning strikes it. She ran her tingling, slightly electrified fingers down the right edge of the paper. Florin, Fournier, Fontaine, Antoine, François, Fourquoy. The lightning whipped through her. How about that? The Fourquoy family had a tomb in Père Lachaise. Yes, there was a Fourquoy tomb at Père Lachaise. Maya worked quickly now, matching the number after Fourquoy's name with the little numbers by the gravestones on the map, and there it was indeed, a tiny picture of a tiny funerary column tucked into a paisley-shaped part of the map that was quite heavily dotted with graves and trees. Not far from Chopin. Well, she had heard of Chopin. She sat for a while, thinking this all over, and then she telephoned Valco. "I think I've found the suitable magic place," she said, little invisible sparks of wild electricity scattering all over the curling vines of that phone. "And you know what? I'm even almost beginning to have a plan." Valco was not pleased, though, when she told him they would be spending Thursday night hiding out in a cemetery. In fact, he balked. "I don't get it. If you think that's a place where he could come back to life, why are you going anywhere near it? You see how illogical that is, right? Plus, I'm not a big fan of cemeteries," he said. "Are you?" "Doesn't matter whether we like them," said Maya. "Listen, I have to find a suitable magical place. I was bound, remember? I have to go near it." "That's silly. Just stay at home. I'll lock your door or something to keep you there." "Haven't you been paying attention? Every time I try to get rid of something I'm bound to keep, or try not to go somewhere I'm bound to go, I end up doing exactly what that Fourquoy wanted anyway. I threw away the compass, and it came back. I dragged you away from the salamander house, and then I went racing back to the writing desk myself. Because my brain came up with such wonderfully good reasons. If you locked my door, I'd probably find some really good reason to climb out the window. Seriously." It was just facing facts, and that's what she was doing. Maya felt the tingle of it in her voice. It was all true, but she had figured out another true bit, too. So far, the only time I've managed to wiggle out of doing something I'm bound to do is when I've looked like I'm doing what Fourcroy wanted, and then kind of cheated right at the end, like when I went back to that writing desk and didn't take the letter. See? That's why the cemetery's so perfect. Valco made a half-doubting, half-intrigued sort of sound. Because the Fourcroy family tomb is an in-between sort of place, with Fourcroy's name on it. It's suitable. And what he really needs is a dose of eternal rest, right? It's the opposite of the rock where he was born, out at Fontainebleau. Maybe shadows hate cemeteries too, said Valco, so maybe it's going to be kind of hard to get him to visit his family tomb. Because other than that, it's perfect, sure. You jump out from behind a grave and tell him you left that blood stain of his in the salamander house, so ha-ha, ingredients missing, no new body for him. And then he cries wicked, shadowy tears, and we stick him to the Fourcroy tomb with superglue. Something like that, right, said Maya, not taking the bait. Now we just have to figure out how to get him there. Maya gave that question some serious thought, and then on Tuesday became anxious about the way time was passing and took a wild leap instead. Mom, she said, could you teach me a little emergency violin, like right away? Her mother laughed out loud. Excuse me? Violin? You? But I remember how you hid under the bed when you were 6. I know, said Maya. It was a family legend. She had been under the bed for 4 hours. The police had almost been called. Maya's career as a musician had begun and ended right there under that bed. Because I didn't want you to show me how to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, I know. But now it's kind of an emergency. That piece Pauline's always playing, I really need to learn to play some of it, by Thursday. Bonjour, and what is this about the violin of Pauline? Said Pauline herself, in her very correct French. Pauline! Maya's father must have let her in just now. Maya's spirit sank another inch or so into the mire. What is it you were saying about the violin? You are an inspiration to Maya, apparently, said Maya's mother. She is suddenly asking for violin lessons. She wants to learn your Saint-Saëns piece, that Danse Macabre. Just a little of it, said Maya, feeling dizzy-headed weakness that is a side effect of watching one's plans step out onto a patch of quicksand and be sucked down to their doom. By Thursday. Now both Pauline and her mother were looking at her with quizzical expressions. But Maya, said Pauline, it is not possible. Even for you, my marvelous Maya, said her mother. And she went, laughing, to the kitchen to get some of those cookies she always brought out when Pauline came over to practice. As soon as Maya's mother had left the room, Pauline whipped her head around and gave Maya a sharp-pointed, spear-shaped stare. What is this about you and the violin? She said. Why do you need the Danse Macabre? Does this have to do with the things changing? The shadow that climbed up my wall? That was part of the problem with Pauline, of course. She hadn't skipped 2 whole grades by being fuzzy-headed or the slightest bit easy to mislead. Yes, said Maya. Pauline waited. Maya opened her mouth to explain and then decided it would be helpful to have some props and dragged Pauline into her room to show her the map. There's an old Fourcroy tomb in Père Lachaise, see? For an Antoine François Fourcroy. The scientist from the 18th century, said Pauline, with a prim pursing of her lips. Whose betrayal, some have said, cost the great Antoine Lavoisier, father of modern chemistry, his head during the Revolution. Maya stared at her. Pauline surprised her by blushing. You mentioned the name Fourcroy the other day, you know, she said with a modest frown. So naturally I did some little researches. So that old Fourcroy was the ancestor of his other one, the shadow? Who comes following you when you play the violin, said Maya. If I could just learn that piece, a little bit of it, maybe he would come following me, and I could lead him to his grave, and he could be finished. That's what I was thinking. This Thursday evening, said Pauline thoughtfully, because of the... She waved her hands about all loop-de-loop in the air. It was as good a way to describe the strangeness as any, thought Maya. There was a silence while Pauline furrowed her brow. "Bon," said Pauline, and she nodded with such decision that her remarkable hair almost sizzled through the air. "It is clear. I will come with you to Père Lachaise. I will play the Danse Macabre, and you will lock the shadow away in his family tomb." "Good. Done." "Girls, James, cookies," called Maya's mother from the other room. Done, thought Maya. Done? It seemed quite far from done to Maya. It was a plan without a plan. To go to this enormous, probably very creepy cemetery, have Pauline play a bit of scritchy violin, and then what? Hope for the best? That was not done. Come to think of it, that was perhaps even the opposite of done. And that night, restlessness made her very uneasy in her skin. So she took the gargoyle's egg out from its hiding place in the summer box and watched the images ripple across its surface. Fields of wildflowers playing in an invisible breeze, horses pulling old-fashioned carriages along a Paris street, a tangle of pine branches as if from the point of view of someone climbing a tree, a woman sitting in a park, turning her head, smiling with eyes full of love. Maya's heart did a little dance. She knew that face. She had seen it carved in stone above the door of the Salamander house. She saw an echo of it every day in the mirror, too, because the look of the Laverots had welled up all over again in her, along, apparently, with the Laverot magic, all these generations later. Light and dark rearranged themselves on the surface of the gargoyle's egg, and the woman, Henri's mother, raised a thin, nimble hand to brush the hair out of her eyes. And Maya saw the bracelet around that wrist, the delicate chain with the waterstone embedded in it. Oh, it was her own bracelet, or the shadow of it, preserved forever in the shifting pigments of the memory stone. It comes with a choice. That was what her mother had said. But what did that even mean? Really, what did that mean? Maya peered at the tiny image in the gargoyle's egg, but it was too small and too indistinct. No clues there as far as she could see. A choice would be an improvement over a world made of billions of little dominoes. That much Maya knew. The problem with her life at the moment was the business of having no choice at all, of being on the clockwork path. After all, what had she done so far that was what you might call anti-clockwork? Not much. She had left the letter with the helpful bloodstain back in the Salamander house. That was good. So maybe the shadow could not get himself a body exactly, if there was no physical trace of him mixed up in the spell. And she had taken the summer box away from the probably very suitable magical spot out in the woods where Fourcroy had been born. But whether what she was planning to do now was clockwork or anti-clockwork, that was hard to say. As she settled the gargoyle's egg back into the summer box, she found herself letting her fingers wander a bit through the little treasures there. The ribbons that had once been the tail of a kite, the envelope holding that lock of baby hair. It was like being zapped by the most miniature bolt of lightning, a tiny shock that sprinted right through her, from fingertip to foot bones. She had forgotten all about that lock of hair. So had Valco, by the way. He would not have been as excited about her leaving the blood-stained letter behind if he had remembered the twist of silver-blonde hair tucked away in the summer box. A physical trace. Maya jumped up. How did you get rid of hair? She had tried throwing the compass button out the window, and it had pretty much bounced right back into her hands. So this was a test. Was she still free enough to be able to destroy a lock of hair tied up in a narrow, old-fashioned ribbon? I'll burn it, she thought, and she was already on her feet and heading to the apartment's little kitchen. Burned things can't come back. There was a flaw in this plan, however. As Maya pounded into the kitchen, she practically ran down her mother, who was putting a carton of milk back into the miniature French refrigerator. Can't sleep, said her mother. Neither can I. Here, I'll heat up some milk for you, too. Maya stared at the ring of blue flame on the stove, and her grip on the envelope from the summer box became instantly several notches more desperate. I'll watch the milk, she said with her newly tightly wound and desperate voice. You go sit down. And she clenched the envelope in her hand. "Maya," said her mother. Could she do it? That was the clockwork question. Her muscles imagined flinging the little envelope into the bright blue flames. She could imagine it. She could imagine it very clearly. But whether her hand could actually move? "Maya, what on earth are you doing?" And she reached right over and plucked the envelope out of Maya's frozen and shuddering hand. It was like being released from a trap made of a million rubber bands all at once. Maya nearly lost her balance and fell over. The unpressure was such a sudden surprise. "Oh," said her mother in a different sort of voice entirely, a delighted, wondering voice. "Look at this, that old lock of James's hair." "James?" said Maya. "You brought this to Paris with you, Maya? But how sweet you are." "James?" said Maya. "His first haircut. You had been reading some old-fashioned book, remember? And you said, 'I want a lock of his hair to keep forever and ever.' We laughed. But it was very adorable of you, actually. So I tied it up in a little bit of ribbon and—" "James?" said Maya a third time. Her mind had gotten itself completely stuck. This was not James's hair. This envelope had been in the summer box. Look at the name scrawled on it. This was not James Davidson's name. The little ribbon actually had an H to F embroidered into it with the tiniest of silk stitches. But her mother's eyes were soft and shining, caught up in that memory of young Maya and baby James and other locks of hair and other ribbons. "You'll keep it very safe, won't you?" said her mother. And she tucked the loop of fine baby hair back into the little envelope and then tucked the envelope back into Maya's hand. Babies are such temporary things. They grow up so fast, and there's so little to remember the babiness of them by. Promise me you'll take care of this." "Even if it isn't from James at all?" said Maya. "Even if it's from somebody much, much less lovable than our James?" "I think it's actually from someone who lived a long time ago." Her mother laughed. "No, sorry," she said. "Only our family's babies ever had hair quite that color. Moonlit babies, that's what my mother used to say. And only just at the start. Look how lovely and brown you are now. Keep it safe, sweetheart. And now here's our milk all steaming and ready." So that was that, unfortunately. Maya could feel the little jolt and tug as the universe popped her right back onto the clockwork path. It is one thing to be bossed around by shadows and gargoyles, but once your mother has added her voice to theirs, especially if your mother is a lavirate, you understand, with just the faintest haze of magic still lingering about her, even if she doesn't quite know it herself. Well, then you are well and truly bound, stuck, and perhaps, in this case, doomed.